Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
And we are the FAIRtax guys. Let's see, where's Fat Albert? There he is. We're ready to go.
Yeah.
And Steve, it is always an honor and a privilege to have you with us. And in case you've been living under a rock, Steve is the president of Americans for Fair Taxation, the national grassroots organization promoting the fair tax. And he is an artesian well of knowledge and information that we're going to try to tap into here on this program. Steve, thanks for being with us.
Always my pleasure and privilege, Bob. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, this is going to be usually when you're on the program, I've got a big topic already laid out for you to address. This time, we're just going to be, I'll take potpourri for 300, Alex. And just kind of, I got a couple of questions in mind I'd like to ask you. And I imagine Scarborough can come up with a couple of them as well. So we're just going to kind of go down a random path here and let the conversation go wherever it leads us. The first question I want to ask you is really the same one that I asked Jade Wiley a couple of weeks ago. And that is, that businesses in America spend millions of dollars and countless man hours doing economic forecasting, trying to figure out what the business climate's going to look like, 6, 12, 18 months down the road or even farther. And with the President Trump saying, I would like to get rid of the income tax, eliminating the corporate income tax would be a seismic shift in the business environment. And so I'm curious what business people you see or know about. Are they taking him seriously? Do they think there can actually be a world with no corporate income tax, or are they still just kind of a bit skeptical of that and thinking that's really more political rhetoric than reality at the moment?
Well, I think it depends on the size of the business. The great big businesses have used the income tax system to their advantage competitively against everybody else. And so a lot of them really are disturbed by this because it takes away one of their anti-competitive tools, because they have literally rooms full of accountants and tax attorneys and outside tax attorneys who help prepare their taxes. So many of them are very skeptical because they also know that DC has for years feasted on the complexity of the income tax and the lobbying money it brings in, which goes into members of Congress pockets, for campaigns. But if you step it down to companies that are like 500 employees or less, they're excited because 80% of them are not paying the corporate income tax. But what they are paying are personal income taxes, personal payroll taxes on all their employees. And to them, it's an incredible possibility. And a lot of the ones that I know have a few clients who are in that 250 to 500 employee range. And they've called me and they're very excited about the prospect because they see it as really unleashing small business and allowing those dollars that have been spent on tax compliance and on just paying the payroll tax, for example, for all their employees and accounting for it to be directed to things that will help grow their business. I mean, one guy said he would probably be able to put on another 15 to 20 employees with what he's saving. And he's not that big a company.
All right.
So I think that's something, Bob, that's it's a long answer to your question, but I believe that you have to look at the elites, which I consider the top corporations to be, in line with the other elites in DC and everybody else.
Okay. In the stock market for just, common stock. I'm not talking about penny stocks or anything like that, but you have the big companies, you have the Coca-Colas, you got the Apple, and so on like that. What happens dynamically to them in a consumption tax scenario? The passage of the fair tax comes, there's a transition out of that entire floor of accountants that are doing tax compliance. What what does that look like? Do you have a crystal ball that would give any kind of indication what happens to them economically beyond
Well,
what you just said?
yeah, I think Jade would probably be better suited to answer this because he has actually worked with those companies. But what would happen, I've talked to Jade about this, is that a lot of those accountants wouldn't be terminated.
Right.
Because they're smart people. Their focus, though, would go toward how do we make our product more competitive in the new world? Because again, depending on the company, if you're looking at the FAIRtax, you suddenly have imports that are subject to the FAIRtax when they're passed along. So instead of having to have tariffs, which they're going crazy about, they would have the same tax system the rest of the world has. And we would be actually putting effectively a tariff on all imported goods from everywhere, of every kind. And there's not one thing that the European countries and the Asian countries can say about it, because that's what they're doing to us, often even in greater extent. And the World Trade Organization, which regulates the world trade, basically like its name, has said that these types of taxes, which are consumption taxes, value-added tax in Europe and most of the world, right, but the FAIRtax are totally legitimate and can be done without any issues at all. So I think a lot of them would be looking at how that would impact it. And it's going to cause a lot of them to start looking at resourcing product here in the States, because those are not subject to that import tax.
Correct.
They're going to be wholesale at a lower price because you're taking all of the cost of the tax system out of the price, 10 to 25% in some cases. And then you're going to be able to include that. So they're going to be looking at how they can deal with imports, pay the tax, there's no way to get around it, but have it set up so that they can still compete in the U.S. And I think those accountants are going to be put to good use.
Yeah, the innovation side of it in terms of
yes,
economies of scale, scaling up operations or showing how they can be more competitive using financial tools that those men and women, the information and that they can bring, the knowledge that they have that they can bring to those corporations will fortify their success internationally. And one more question that sort of follows in with that: international other countries that are out there. If another country decided all of a sudden, it might be in a way of thinking like we are, if they pass the FAIRtax or they pass a consumption tax that's not like value added plus or plus and then value added, what does that do for our competitiveness? Somebody that gets there before we do in enacting a tax on consumption.
Well, you've seen what it does so far, because basically it creates a huge incentive for our companies, many of which have subsidiaries in foreign countries, because they can benefit from that rebate of the VAT effectively and sell products over here or bring them over here like 20% cheaper than if they were produced in the US, because they don't have to carry all the costs of the income tax, payroll tax system. So what you're going to see, I think, is that a lot of these people are going to, and Canada already does this, they're going to have goods and services taxes that are increased. But remember, when they increase that goods and services tax, it's on everybody in their country. Mm-hmm. So yes, it is going to affect us, but it's also going to have to pass scrutiny by a lot of people. And that's an advantage of these taxes because they are visible. As I've said before on this show, I don't care if you have a quantum computer, you're not going to be able to calculate the actual tax you pay because of so much of the tax being hidden from you in the price of goods and services. So you're not going to be able to calculate it. With a consumption tax, you can do it on the calculator on your phone. You can find out how much of the consumption tax is going to be saved when Bobby Kennedy cuts those 20,000 or 30,000 jobs at HHS. How much is going to be saved if the Department of Education goes away? You can actually calculate it because you got the consumption tax raising X dollars. Y dollars is the amount being saved. And so Z would be the amount of rate would go down. That will be a tiny fraction for those two instances I gave you, very tiny, but you can calculate it. Instead of 23%, it might be 23 or 22.9. You see what I'm saying? So, and if Musk is able to save $1 trillion in fraud, I don't think there's anybody on this call that can say what that effect is going to be personally on us. We don't know. With a fair tax in place, we would exactly know, because we would know how much of that 23% could be reduced by $1 trillion of savings. And frankly, it'd be somewhere we'd be down to about 18% tax to raise enough revenue to cover the existing systems, what it would bring in. So we're talking about visibility, but also, as your point, Bob Scarborough, predictability. Because now people don't know if they are going to be able to deduct research and development for 5 years. They may think they can do it for 1 year, but Congress can change it. And the Supreme Court has said you can do anything you want, Congress, with the rate. So there's no predictability. And it's most important, though, for the smaller guy, the smaller company, because his margins are different in most cases. And he needs to be able to predict, because buying that machine to increase production, it's very important to him that he be able to pay for it. And if he's counting on the tax system to pay part of it, you better not change the tax system. Now, with the fair tax, you've got a flat thing. He can predict 10, 15, 20 years going forward what it's going to be. Because it isn't going to be any after-tax cost to him. It's all pre-tax. And remember,
the calculation of that, in other words, forecasting, he can go out through his entire lifetime career and without having to worry about the whim or political pressure or the winds of change in Congress every 2 years or every 6 years.
100%. And that's the thing that you've just summed up one of the chief reasons that there is so much embedded opposition in DC and among the elites who run these big companies and everything, is because they profit from that control, that threat of taking that away from you. And so it's something that became known to me back in the early 90s when I talked to some of these people. They would actually go white when they thought that people were going to know how much tax they paid. In other words, what was hidden and what was now obvious. And one of the politicians, I think I've told you before, who was a pretty prominent member of the House, said, if people know how much they actually are paying, there'll be a revolt. And I think Trump is summing that up pretty nicely, that people are ready for a huge change. And you've got Lutnick, his commerce secretary, saying Trump wants to get rid of the income tax. You've got Trump sending all these messages. But I saw an article today. I'm going to write a chairman's report on it. But it's referring to an analysis by Moody Analytics, which said that over 50% of the spending, maybe even higher, is spent by 10% of the population. People talk about the fact that, this is a boon for the rich. Remember, we hear that as an objection. Trump's just taking care of the wealthy. All right. I guarantee you that those 10% of the people that are making all these purchases are paying much less percentage-wise of income tax than the three of us here.
Oh, yeah.
because they're in a position to hire people to legally do it, just like Trump, when his tax returns came out,
Yeah.
was paying no income tax. Not anybody said it wasn't legal. Boy, they scrutinized those returns within an inch of their life, but they couldn't find anything that was illegal. And the
Mm-hmm.
same thing's true with Musk. The same thing's true with Bezos. You just go down the list. Mark Cuban, all those people whose returns got released were paying very small amounts of tax legally. But boy, they are buying things. I mean, Bob Paxton, the couch they bought would furnish my whole house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the money they spent.
Yeah, I
And
understand.
so,
You
and
fill
this,
up your, I
go
say,
ahead.
fill up your private 757, and you'll pay more fair tax than you have paid income tax for 10 years.
Or maybe forever. Yeah. Yeah.
How does the
So,
how does the media? I'm hoping I'm not. You make your final comment, and then I have a
no, I
comment.
think that's all I was going to say is I think it's the evidence is now coming out.
And in that we have roadblocks, ideological roadblocks that have been plowed into the political landscape for the last 40 years or more in some cases. That is just now bubbling up, and you can't talk to one guy about uh, changing the tax code without it being some something that's just going to be. I just don't want to hear it because I believe this way or I
Right.
believe that way. How do you get around? How do you get around that? How do you talk to the across the chasm of ideological differences when you want to when you want to tell somebody, look, I got this great thing that's going to be wonderful for everybody. And we were talking about this in a recent episode. Uh, it's not a political the fair tax isn't political at all. How do you tell people? How do you get to it? How do you get across that divide, which seems to be getting wider and wider every day?
Well, with a big, strong club.
Okay.
And my club in this case is Donald Trump,
Okay.
because I think he will be able to go out and effectively neutralize a lot of these covert people who are against this, not because they will say it publicly, but they express all these things. Like, I have trouble reading the Wall Street Journal because every headline is a negative attack on Trump, whatever it's about. And you read some of these other newsletters that I get, and you look at the Washington Post, you look at these different publications, you've got the elites looking at this as crazy. You've got people in Congress who have been calling for debt reduction, who are expressing great concern about cutting the federal workforce and finding this. Like, they found that one survey, if you guys saw it this morning, the Musk Group found a survey that was done that the federal government was billed $1 billion, $1 billion, and it could have been done on something like Survey Monkey with as good of results for 10 grand. That's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of disdain they have for us in DC. They have total disdain for the fact that they are bankrupting the country. But all of those people who have fed it to trough for so many years, but yet still said we're for balanced budgets, we're for this, are very unwilling to have it occur, because it means that a lot of those dollars that they have just thrown around to their friends are no longer going to be available. And I think Trump can go to a district and he can talk to the senator, or he can talk to the senator and say, look, if you don't feel like you can support this, it's totally understandable. I'm going to go to your district, though, and I'm going to have a meeting. And I'm going to get 50,000 people. And I'm going to explain all the benefits of what we're doing. We're getting rid of the IRS. We're getting rid of taxes on tips. We're getting rid of, all these things that are so popular. And we're going to go to a tax but it's not going to hurt you because the effective rate is going to be less than what you're paying now because of this family allowance that we're giving you, the prebate. And explain that it's too bad that their representative or their senator is not in favor of this, and you're not really sure why, because it makes so much sense, and you would urge them to contact his office and get an explanation, because I'm sure he has a good explanation.
Oh, yeah.
Of why he doesn't want to free the American people up from this tyranny.
He has an explanation, but not one that he's willing to say in public.
I suspect that Trump will have to go to very few town hall meetings, because these guys will see it immediately that they're not going to be able to defend by, oh, well, we need to do more studies. No, not going to go anywhere. Oh, well, it may not be good for some people. All right. If you don't like the bill, give me a way to fix it. That's what when I testified to Congress, I said, look, if you don't like something about this, you think it doesn't handle a particular area that you believe should be done, let's talk about it. If we need to, let's amend the bill. But let's not kill the thing because it's not perfect. Don't let it be the enemy of the good or the better or greatly improved.
Absolutely. All right. So there's one more little road I want to go down here. It should be right in your wheelhouse. Now, we have had since 1999 H.R. 25 as a bill before Congress. It's not gone anywhere. Right. But in that time, we have had a companion bill in the Senate sometimes and not others. Currently, I think for the past 6 years, there has been no FAIRtax companion bill in the Senate to H.R. 25. Now, I know if we ever get somebody in the Senate to step up and do that, you're going to be involved in it. Give me an idea of, are we going to make any progress in getting the FAIRtax in the Senate?
I think we are. I think that the time to really start dialing up the pressure, because we've got some people that were previously sponsors. We've got Jim Banks from Indiana, who was an ardent sponsor in the House for all the time he was there. He's now in the Senate. We've got Ted Cruz, who I've talked to about it in the past. Jerry Moran was a sponsor in the Senate. However, until they finish the, let's just say, making modifications or reinforcing the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, they're not going to be willing to put attention on anything else. Once we get past that, the immigration and the budget, that's taken all the oxygen out of the room. And that's why we've talked about having a forum. I've had an offer to go meet, potentially, not necessarily, but with Senator Feder from Pennsylvania, who's a bit of a wild card, who might be interested in this. But I'm not going to take advantage of it until after they get past this and they all take a victory lap or whatever they do.
Oh, what would that do if we have a Democrat sponsoring the FAIRtax in the Senate? That would hopefully tear down a lot of walls.
Well, I think it probably would. We came very close with Ben Cardin because he's from Maryland. He's a very, very liberal. He's retired now. When he had his bill, which exempted all income taxes up to $100,000, and then had a VAT for corporate and had income tax over $100,000 at 3 rates, as I recall. So he was moving toward us, and it opened a lot of doors for me in Congress, because I could point to his bill and say, Ben Cardin wrote this, because it took away all of the objections to how you're punishing the lower income people. And Cardin blatantly told me he copied our information on that sales tax, the same way we did the prebate, everything. Now, he did not get rid of the payroll tax, which I went over with him, and he said, well, let's talk about it. And then it got sidetracked when Hillary got nominated, because his orders were to keep it away until Hillary came in. And I learned later from a former congressman in Maryland, he was going to make it or Hillary was going to make it one of her initiatives to do it.
How about that?
And so we never worked with him. I tried to see him after that, and I always got a polite no, type thing. But I think we're going to have a shot at getting more than one senator, but I think it has to be after this, and then we have to continue to put pressure on President Trump in a nice way. And to speak to that, we've got this national survey going on through ActiVote,
yep.
which was
I took it.
Yep. And I think when they're done, we're going to have a pretty good idea of how familiar people are with the FAIRtax and how many people will support it. Unfortunately for us, in a way, fortunately, probably for the credibility of the poll, they wanted it to be really neutral. They wanted to show both sides. They wanted to have a lot of information that was not only positive, but also what are some of the negatives, so people could actually review that. And we still think we're going to come out all right. They're going to take 1,000 people who are representative of America, basically, who took the survey, and they're going to then give us a compilation of what the results were. So it's going to be really fascinating when we see that. But those are the kind of things that we need to get in front of the president, although he doesn't seem to care. We're going to exempt income up to 150,000. Well, obviously, tariffs are going to work, if at all, for 6 months before people get around them. So he's going to have to do something. He wants to cut the income tax. He's cutting back the IRS employees. They're going to have less ability to audit. He's literally doing all the work for getting rid of the income tax. And I think some senators are going to see this as it's time to get on.
Well, yeah, we need to get some sleight of hand here so that President Trump can claim credit for coming up with the FAIRtax, make it look like his idea. And then, even though it's been around since 1999, find a way to make it look like his idea and get him on board with it.
Well, I think he will probably demand there be certain changes to it, partly in response to the attacks of "you're helping the wealthy." So I suspect we're going to have him his team coming back, Bob, and saying things like, well, the prebate, maybe we taper it down. I hate this because it's still income part, but that's one thing that'll appeal to to some of the people in DC. We're going to charge a higher sales tax on purchases over 250,000 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have a higher family allowance. So instead of 44,000, family of four, maybe it's 55,000. Okay.
Well,
I think that's what he's going to have to do in his mind to sell it to his base. Because remember, his base is that average family making 60 grand a year.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the big money people.
As I say, it's always a pleasure to have you. We are running right up against our time deadline here. But again, we thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise. We will pick your brain again here in a few months. Glad to have you with us. So that's it. We're going to have to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and sharing the videos. Until we meet again on same time, same channel. I'm stuck on that. But anyway, we will see you next week here on FAIRtax Power Radio. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
Oh, mercy. We are the FAIRtax guys. Reminding you, the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand
it.
So tell me how it works.
It's probably changed since the last time I saw it, but the short answer would be, you want to take this one?
Oh, sure. Okay. Imagine bringing home everything you make. You don't get taxed for saving or accumulating wealth, and your boss doesn't get taxed more even if he pays you more.
Wow, now see, that's amazing.
And so the end result of all that is the cost of producing products and running a business goes down, so things cost less. And on top of all that, imagine every criminal, non-citizen, and under-the-table worker also paying taxes.
That's amazing.
That's the fair tax. We tax what you consume as you consume it, and that's it.